Any of your Oh. Thank you for recording me. So for a few years now, the library has been leading the change to bring the open initiatives to Drexel as part of its strategic commitment to ensure access to information and also importantly to contain the costs of higher education for our students.
God, that's horrible.
The cost of textbooks, yes.
Yeah. Oh, is that what she said? I thought she said we were terrible. I think we heard you. I'm glad you echoed that terrible cost of education. So by guiding Drexel faculty to adapt the open textbooks, open access journals, and other open education resources in lieu of the traditional textbook that you as faculty go out and expect people to buy, we are hoping that we help the university ensure equal access to course materials and lower the out-of-pocket costs and expenses that students incur to access their curricular reading assignments. So in 2018, for example, on behalf of the university, the libraries joined the Open Textbook Network, which is a group of more than 600 academic institutions that work to promote access, affordability, and student success using open textbooks. So we're leveraging the benefits of this membership paired with our library's staff expertise to enable faculty to take full advantage of OTN resources and other strategies to reduce student expenses, improve learning outcomes, and increase student success. But the success of our efforts to contain student costs requires not only faculty empathy, which these three had in spades, as we discovered last year too many of our faculty did, but also a lot of their time and effort to make this change in teaching. So today we'll take a deeper look at these three different ways Drexel professors have developed their support of adopting OERs through the Library Faculty Fellows Program. So with one-time funding from the provost, we launched the Library Faculty Fellows Program in 2018 as an innovative way to extend the library's human capacity to advance its strategic initiatives. So we appointed our second cohort of fellows in January 2019, and 3 of them chose to promote and or incorporate OER in their curriculum. So you see them here today. Doug Barrett, who's the Associate Professor and Director of Curricular Innovation, in the middle there, and Student Success for the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences and Professional Studies of the College of Medicine. Still all the same. All right, to my far left, Vito Gula, who's an Adjunct Professor in the Department of English and Philosophy in the College of Arts and Sciences. And to my immediate left, Antonis Kontsos, Associate Professor and Director of Theoretical and Applied Mechanics Group in the College of Engineering. So thank you for joining us today, gentlemen. So I will moderate our panel discussion by posing a few topics, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion with the audience. So let's start by having each of you identify briefly what triggered your interest in open access initiatives and applying to the fellowship in the first place. Any one of you could start.
Well, I mean, just the main goal was to cut textbook costs, and it fit in well with my current position as Director of Curricular Innovation and Student Success. And I had such a positive experience working with a liaison librarian. I wanted to share that with fellow faculty and encourage them to enrich their curriculum. And I like my role as kind of a cheerleader and a matchmaker in this way, cheering for, and getting faculty to work with the librarians.
I'll go next. So, I mean, two real reasons here. I mean, one, the cost of textbooks is kind of ridiculous. I think the cost of textbooks is the only thing that's gone up more than the cost of tuition, percentage-wise. And I was a kid who worked through college, went to community college, worked nights, and I had to pay for my textbooks. So that was a big impetus for me getting involved in this stuff. And the other thing is, I mean, personally, I'm a little fickle. I don't see a lot of what I want in textbooks. So like making my kind of own stuff, putting it together, helps me make my teaching better.
I have to admit that cost was not the first thing in my mind. So I'll be honest here. However, it did end up being one of the significant perks out of it. In my case, we developed this course for a very how can I say, it's a very important freshman design course in the College of Engineering, for which multidisciplinarity has to be instilled. And unfortunately, no textbook can actually be adopted because there's not a single textbook that encompasses this particular need. Therefore, that fact, plus my internal motivation in response to Dean's comment about providing a core course with cutting-edge research topic influence, forced me, before even the fellowship announcement was out, to consider adopting this kind of resources, because that's the only way I thought I could provide this topic together. And luckily, it was a good marriage because it happened at the right time. So that was it.
Well, yours is a good segue to the second.
Sure.
So we'll let you continue. If you can give us a brief description of what you did to help advance the open textbook concept during your very short 6-month library fellowship.
So the course was essentially a design experience for freshmen that includes freshmen from all 7 majors in the College of Engineering. So imagine perhaps how essentially an architecture engineer is different from electrical engineer. They have similarities, but also differences. So the idea was around 3D printing and how advanced manufacturing can help them design and build things. So pretty much every week, because I had to cram this multidisciplinary material together, at the end of each lecture, which was very structured, we had elements that promoted the curricular experience to go to the next level. We handpicked ourselves the topics that we felt, A, give more depth to the topics that I couldn't have enough time to cover in 2 hours, but B, provided the extensions needed for someone who had a particular major to go and find more about a particular topic that perhaps could be more close to their projects. So I forgot to mention that a big portion of the class was a project of a group of students, and therefore, from the get-go, students had to form teams and individualize themselves from others because they had to form their own project idea. And therefore, the online components and the things with it was the only way, perhaps, to cater to all needs specific to what each team's focus was wanted to be. So that ended up being very wonderful because at the end of the day, students took this initiative, and as they were learning by themselves, they actually went online on YouTube or other means and started getting this online tutorials. There were databases and they found articles and they found patents. And essentially, each one of them formed their own research experience and learning experience without us having to be micromanage them every step of the way to get the essential information they need to succeed to the project.
I was really impressed because I had a chance to see some of the presentations that were made. It just blew me away how much they were able to do in that short period. But an expression that he set the tone, and that was that he was treating these undergraduates as graduate students, that they had to go and take ownership of their learning and take ownership of how they were going to go about and find resources, as opposed to just, take this book, read it, and you're all set. So that was a very interesting piece of it. Derek, you want to go?
If I
Sure,
may defer,
yeah.
because I wanted to
Yes, yours
comment
is a
on the
good one,
wonderful
yeah.
work of my fellows
All right,
here.
quiet
That's
yourself.
part of my statement.
All right, so in my case, I worked on an open textbook myself, and as part of that, I also came up with these very interesting writing exercises. I came up with about over 100 of them for my first year writing students. And I actually have a chance this semester to actually incorporate a lot of this stuff. And I don't know if it's a good sign or a bad sign. One of my students this morning, she said to me, I took the assignment you gave us to the Writing Center, and the tutor told me, what is this? So I'm interested to see, I mean, she did seem like it was actually a useful assignment, but it certainly gets an interesting response from people. And the other thing I did was I conducted informal focus groups with a number of faculty members in English and philosophy to see what are the barriers when it comes to getting people to adopt these. What does the department know about open textbooks, and how can we encourage this more across the board?
So yeah, my colleague Vito and Antonios have engaged in some very exciting educational scholarship as part of their fellowship. So that was one of the things I captured. I went and spoke to in various venues, webinars, faculty meetings, and again, was a cheerleader for faculty to work with librarians and develop, identify the open educational resources. What you two have done, that you illustrated that it's not just about cutting costs, certainly the primary, that it can actually wonderfully enhance the educational experiences for our students at the same time. So in addition, so I was a cheerleader, if you will, and matchmaker in terms of encouraging faculty to work with liaison librarians. And I also reviewed an open textbook that, that's something we all could do to see if there are materials in our fields, and are they appropriate? Can they be useful in our courses, or maybe they, like to be frank, in my case, the textbook I reviewed needed maybe another edition, another version. But again, what does a review do? Is to help the authors take the next step and make it into a more useful resource.
I think another thing that Doug brought up, we had a little informal debriefing after the end of our thing, and Vito was a little discouraged. He said, well, I don't think I succeeded in doing it, and nobody wanted to accept my stuff at all. And when you mentioned that you developed 100 exercises, immediately your colleagues said, what? I could certainly use that.
And I did.
And you did.
Yes.
So that's exactly another kind of synergy that happens, because we can cross disciplines, cross intentions for doing it, and sharing that just quite openly without having you get your people to buy his textbook, which hadn't quite been written. So let's continue. You started to suggest, I think, you're starting to suggest the question, what barriers exist to Drexel's broader adaptation of open education resources and coursework? Maybe you'd like to start that, since you set it up at one point.
So I mean, to me, it seems like there's two big barriers that faculty has when it comes to adopting. I mean, first, I feel like this is the way it's always been done, right? And people don't like change. So you have to make it appealing to people that there is a reason to switch. That was one of the big themes that seemed to stand out when I was conducting my focus groups and interviews with faculty members from English philosophy. And the other thing is, and I think Doug maybe can speak to this too when we talk about reviewing textbooks or open source textbooks, is that there does seem to be a stigma attached to these types of projects. Just the idea that something is being given away for free usually suggests that it's not a quality product. And we have resources or access to resources here like the Open Textbook Network. And I mean, some of these are written by serious scholars, and I've gone through a few of them myself. I didn't do any formal review like Doug did, but like some of these are really good resources that can be used in any classroom. But it's certainly harder, I think, for STEM fields than it is maybe for English or philosophy, because this stuff has been taught to death for the last 2,000 years.
And that brings up a point, in the open, the traditional textbooks, the review process is sort of a black box. We don't see the open textbooks, the reviews are there online for you to read. You can see who wrote about what they're saying, if they make valid points, so that in terms of the strength and weaknesses of that particular resource.
Any other barriers?
I have a few. How much time do I have?
Take a few
So
minutes.
I categorize them in two buckets. I'll talk about the external to Drexel bucket. In engineering, we have an accreditation body called ABET. We're going through ABET this weekend and this week. So pretty much we have to comply to all accreditation criteria that cramps material and credit hours and student class sizes and everything else. And obviously we have to report back all this to metrics such as faculty to student ratio and everything else that affects a lot the adoption of new tools that perhaps can come together. Let's talk about some internal things that I think are more severe obstacles. I'll start with something I think is close to Danuta's heart. I think there's lack among faculty about the available resource we have on campus. I think Danuta mentioned to me we're paying quite a few hundreds of thousands of dollars when it comes to online access, but I wonder how many faculty really know what journals and what databases we actually use on a daily basis and how we can actually optimize that, if any. I also think there's lack of incentives. I'm a research active faculty in the course of engineering, and I could say that if I do any pedagogy or innovation in education type thing, that will be mostly stigmatized in my educational portfolio, and in my faculty annual review, I will be advised to stick with my research and gain some dollars and not talk about how to become a better teacher. Actually, this goes a long way of saying no incentives are given to faculty like myself, who predominantly are here because we love teaching. Obviously we can be, in my case, as you said, Vito, I could be in a national lab doing research under a bunker, but I chose to be in a university in a major city because I feel like I have an impact to the world. And I think all these three things combined make a toxic environment in which if you attempt even to have this kind of new initiatives, unless incentives are provided, unless support is actually given, you end up being perhaps marginalized for trying to get this unicorn in the field and not trying to essentially go to the mainstream where solutions exist and exams exist, and you spend too much time trying to write a book that essentially someone else has made for you. So that's a bitter approach to this at Drexel, because I feel like we are already forced by the quota system to produce quite a bit in quite a few weeks, and therefore there is perhaps not enough room for us to grow and actually adopt some of these new initiatives. So.
Doug, you had some other
Yeah.
attitudes towards this.
So it's great. I'm developing a new course, and I will certainly take advantage of the open resources that are available and licensed resources. My goal, and the current course that I teach, everything is available electronically at no cost to the students, and I'd like that to be the case for this new course. And I could, start from scratch and work with the libraries and find what the best resources that are possible. But most cases, many of us have taught a course for a number of years, and we're used to a particular textbook, and we've developed other resources that go along with that, presentations, assignments, and so on. So it's quite an investment of time to develop that, and it would be investment of time to revise those resources. So that would be a barrier that I think that I appreciated that many of you would face and changing to a new textbook.
This echoes a lot of what we're hearing among our other colleagues at other institutions. And I noticed that Lloyd Eckert is on the line. He was one of our first faculty fellows, and he'd been addressing this topic and did a number of interviews to just try to gauge what's Drexel's receptivity to going this way. And one of the big things that came out of those conversations is much of what you were saying, but the biggest one I recall was time. That somehow we have to figure out how to, universities, figure out how to give incentives, but also actual just time for the faculty to prepare their courses, whether it's using open textbook or not, but being able to address that. So we'll look forward to some new and innovative ways to try and do that. So another question, what reactions from students have you observed in thinking about this? Maybe you want to tackle that one?
I'll go ahead. So I started introducing these concepts and a lot of the stuff I was working on the last 2 semesters or 2 quarters. This the past 5 weeks here, and it's very interesting reactions I'm getting. On the one hand, my students love the fact that they don't have to purchase a textbook. They ask, they're like, "What? I don't have to pay $50 or $60 for the Norton? This is fantastic." But then they get into my class and they think to themselves, where am I and what is this? And maybe it's a little different because of my pedagogy is a little different, I think, than a lot of my colleagues in terms of what I'm asking the students to do. But certainly the readings I've introduced that I've written myself, my students, gives them a different perspective that I wouldn't have gotten from any other tool, because the way I think about writing is that it's all about the possibilities. You have to keep your mind open and see every option that is available. So I've written these very interesting essays that go along with the exercises that make them kind of think outside of the box. But I think overall the response has been very positive. I mean, I saw something this morning that made me very excited, where a student was like, at first I didn't entirely understand what I was getting into. He's like, now after 4 weeks of writing so much in your class and doing the things that you've asked us to do and reading the stuff that you've provided, this is all kind of coming together and it clicks. So that was a very satisfying moment this morning.
The students certainly appreciate not having to shell out hundreds of dollars for that textbook, and the convenience of accessing it from their connected device or laptop. Any place where they can have Wi-Fi is a great advantage as well. But I also want to say too that I want to kind of highlight some of the things that colleagues have done in the College of Medicine in developing some novel resources, but that Dr. Aviva Goldman, our department, neurobiology and anatomy, developed a virtual microscope, and she and colleagues scanned all of these slides. We teach histology, the study of cells and tissues, and now all that material that was previously only accessible in a laboratory microscope can now be available to our students at no cost online, and it really enhances and enriches their educational experience, and we hear that they appreciate that.
The comment I will make here is that millennials, or whoever is beyond millennials, whatever they're called now, they learn, interact, and search differently, and therefore, as instructors, we need to respect that in a way. So, for instance, I made the use of laptops and cell phones almost compulsory in class because I knew that they want to do this either way. So I feel that essentially the major advantage that I saw in students is that they felt they can actually search and find anything. And that goes to a lot of the lifelong learning experience. Pretty much if you instill this idea of learn because your project says you should learn, not because I say you should learn, then they learn with more attitude and a more interest. And they do it because they really have to go to the next step and not because that thing is self-contained, whatever topic it might be, right? So I saw this idea of self-encouragement that we can actually go and build anything now. It's kind of romantic because at the end of freshman year, those students felt more engineers than at the end of the senior year, where they feel essentially that pretty much they know nothing. So we kind of do the wrong thing in engineering school. We get them so hyped from high school to be engineers, and then we turn them into something that they want to be very focused on. So I think that the major thing is the idea of essentially them learning now methods that they can use to learn anything.
So what do you suggest others can do to further the adoption of open resources at Drexel?
In my opinion, was to spell out the advantages for the instructor and the advantages for the student, the advantages for administrators. As you said, cost for the student, administrators might have a plethora of things to choose from, the instructor having a plethora of material to choose from. So you're no longer to the 10 exams you used in the past 10 years. You have now a whole list of things. And by the way, the interaction thing, I mean, the new material is more colorful, more powerful, more interactive. So I think it brings a new fresh air, and even in a classic topic you might have in basic sciences or in applied science.
To help get the word out. Which, Doug, you've been
But
taking that on as one of your missions in life.
I have kind of messages for 3 different groups. I mean, in faculty, we're part of our job is to be creative, create new works, and so I would encourage you. We're supposed to, in our copious free time, we have to squeeze that in amongst our teaching and other responsibilities. But to make use of that and consider making a place for that, doing some of the amazing creative things like Antonio Savito have described, and my colleagues. I mentioned the virtual microscope too. Doing things like that that are going to benefit you and your students in the university. For chairs, I would encourage chairs to recognize and reward that activity, so that the colleagues who have achieved in this area can derive some recognition and benefit in a career advancement in that. And administrators, some universities have invested resources and get faculty time and making time for faculty, maybe a small grants program to help faculty develop these types of resources. And the result of that would be, that benefits to our students and benefits to the university, and that the cost would be lower for the students, and the materials would be more exciting and more effective.
So, I mean, I think they're, kind of echoing what Doug's saying. I mean, I think having people go out there and share about this is a huge part of it, and having the time is also to just be able to explore these, because there's so many free options available that most of us are completely ignorant to. That was something I saw when I was talking to, my colleagues in English, in the English department, just didn't know what was available. The other thing I would maybe add too is that students probably need to know that these things exist. I feel like they will start making the demands on us to incorporate them if they hear it's free. I don't even think we need to say anything else, because we've seen it where students don't buy a book for an entire semester and still, skate through. So why not make it so that they can just not have to pay anything and have this thing that they actually use? I would say those are my 3 things.
Yeah. Doug, you're starting to do some stuff. Do you think there's a role for the Senate to try to help?
Well, sure. I
Move
mean,
this along?
certainly the Senate committee that reviews new courses might consider taking some of these availability, asking faculty to consider some of the available open resources. It might be something where the Senate and the committee that does that review might be able to contribute and help us move forward in that.
Great. So, unless you have some last comments, I'd suggest maybe we open. We've still got time. So, if something else comes to mind, we'll be bringing it in, and we'll certainly ask. I think Stacey, you're tracking the questions that are coming. But so let's open up the discussion from the audience. For anyone who's listening to Zoom, if you can type your questions. I guess Stacey's already recording those. We'll bring them up as well. Do we hear any questions from the audience? Larry.
Sure. So, as you know, open textbooks are part of a wider movement towards open information, including open access, journals, and open monographs. How have your projects or your experiences with these projects given you an idea of what the libraries can do to support people who are thinking about going into using these other aspects of the open environment?
I'll answer this question. So, I mean, I don't know that I entirely have an answer for this in the sense, I mean, this is something I've always been passionate about myself. I'm sure you're familiar with like hacktivist movements and stuff like that, open source projects. I was, growing up, I used to like build computers and do coding and stuff like that. And that was always something that I thought was super important, to be accountable, transparent, and just be able to share information freely. I mean, it's regarding like libraries to be able to do this, because I do want to see more open source journals. And how do you do it through legal means? I don't entirely know if I have an answer. I'm sorry.
So I have my personal experience in this. I mean, as a researcher, the open access becomes almost a sore point, because every time I try to do an open access publication, they ask me for an insane amount of money, which I don't have, to pretty much support the publication costs. So pretty much I click no, because not because I don't want to, it's because I cannot afford $1,500 or $3,000, whatever it is in this case, which I think is absurd. So the library can be a liaison with this publishing house to understand, yes, we want to support the open access, but definitely there is no way to do this. But back to education now, I agree with you. Essentially, for me, the textbook is just a very small subset of what we call open access to information. And as I said before, I think students do learn in a different way, and I think we produce results and products of our scholarly activity in a different way. So, imagine posting something on YouTube, or imagine making an online class, imagine making all these components that perhaps can supplement what I do in 60-minute lecture at a university like Drexel. So I do think that essentially this interactiveness, this openness is not just an option nowadays. For me, it's going to become a necessity, if not a mandate, for many reasons, unless you want to be essentially in a silo where you don't see what's going on there. So we might want to be more sensitive about adopting this earlier than later.
And actually, now I think about it, I'll add too. I mean, I think having faculty that uses Creative Commons license, right, for basically anything you do, I think is a really good way to maybe support libraries. So
we in the library are trying to look at other ways to help raise awareness about the whole landscape of scholarship, and open access is will be one of our topics in another setting, and continual setting. And I don't want to be quoted yet on this, but we were recently looking at some evidence that one of our vendors supplied, and correct me if I'm wrong, and two of you also share this, but the projection I think was as early as 2025 or 26, just a few years down the line, that will be the tipping point. That of the publications, it'll be past 50% that will be available open access. There's movements in the research arena, particularly in Europe, where funding agencies, a whole group of them, have mandated that anything that is funded by the government funding agencies, the output has to be put into an open access journal. And these are countries where reside many of the really outstanding publishers in particularly STEM and different areas. And they're all beginning to wonder, how are we going to accommodate that? So there is a movement afoot, and I think it's good that we're finally starting to raise and trying to understand where the university is. We're not in a position to just take that over, but I think we can help by having many of our staff, it's our professional interest to keep on tap with it. So if you have other questions, bring it.
If I may add a point, talking about databases, obviously archived information in form of textbooks is one form of data, but as you know, data can come in multiple ways. For instance, in sciences, although I cannot speak for all sciences, the issue of data sets and veracity of data sets and truthfulness in the publications we put together it has become actually not an elite option, becomes now a mandate. In School of Medicine, the same thing. So imagine publishing some work or use some work in a classroom and supplying the actual data set someone can use independently to do their own thing, whatever it might be, from English all the way to chemistry, and therefore promoting essentially this idea of transparency and truthfulness instead of actually being secretive behind a formula and some data sets that you never got to see if something works, right? So I think actually becomes an issue of advancing science as a whole and advancing data science as a tool. And that's where the library can become a depot of how we organize this whole thing at the university level.
Another great topic that we'll take up. We've been trying to put some attention on how to help that. Any other questions from the room? Yeah.
Does
Could you
Drexel have
identify
something?
yourself too? Could you identify yourself for everybody?
I'm Lex Romanchuk. I'm an alumni. I taught a night course for 4 years one time in the night school. And like we had 2 textbooks, and I told them not to bother with the one, have any notes for that, and which one was the better one. But I was wondering if do you have any kind of thing like a wiki page to help make the open source resources used by Drexel known, where people may have reviews of the books, list all the things that are used at Drexel in courses now, and faculty could add their own comments on it, and students too. You got anything like that?
Great question. Larry, would you like to take that one?
Sure.
Maybe you should introduce yourself to people who don't know everything.
I'm Larry Milliken. I'm the manager of scholarly communications here for the libraries. So we have a library guide, one of our collection of library guides on open educational resources. And on that, we link to a number of different repositories and collections of open textbook materials and other open educational materials that are not textbooks, kind of all centralized there that are good landing places. A big one that is related to the reviewing of textbooks that Doug did is the Open Textbook Network. They have something called the Open Textbook Library, which has the collection of often reviewed open textbooks.
So you do have like a list of, I'm thinking specifically the open source textbooks that are being used at like Drexel right now, something that students can easily find information on.
Yeah, we don't have a list right now, but that's something that we are like looking to gather information about.
And the other thing on the horizon, one of our vendors is trying to build a better platform to integrate as you're searching for materials, the open access, things that are not behind the firewalls, the paywalls rather, to be incorporated in your searching. So that's trying to put it at the same level of accessibility and access. So we're looking forward to seeing more about that. Literally just came out. Any other questions from our group? Or I don't think we haven't. You'll raise a hand if you've gotten some from it. So any of you on connecting remotely, type in your questions. Otherwise, Jay, want to identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jay Bhatt. I'm the librarian for engineering, and my question is dealing with the open textbooks. And I have met so many students, and they all say that their textbooks are so expensive. We don't have money to buy textbooks. In fact, a couple of students actually cried in my office because they didn't have money to buy, and it's a real experience. And then I'm looking into so many other faculty members who write textbooks, and when I tell them to think about open textbook network, as you said, there's a stigma attached to it, and they think about quality versus the cost. So my question is, how do we motivate and inspire these faculty members to think about writing a textbook for the platforms such as Open Textbook Network?
I think I might have some, it seems like a daunting task, to set out and this is, in terms of, again, our copious free time. But many of these under the Creative Commons licenses, you can use portions of the material. So you wouldn't necessarily, maybe there's some chapters in existing ones that are going to work very well, but maybe there's something that, a unique topic or a different approach to it. So that when you talk to someone about writing a chapter, that's a little less daunting than writing a whole textbook. So that might be a way to encourage
So
faculty.
maybe collection of chapters from different authors and then make it as one book.
Yeah, so you are kind of a reviewer and this compendium and looking for the best materials out there in each of the subtopics and assembling those for your students, curating them is the word I'm looking for. And that way that our students can get the best materials, and in this case at no cost to them.
I mean, I think the other thing too is, just some people have to commit. I think it's one of those things where if you lead by example, other people will follow. It's something that I'm doing in my class. I hope other people hear about it and they, my students make their students jealous and say, I didn't have to pay for textbook this semester. I feel bad for you. So that's real. I think that's, at least for me, that's the thing that's going to help people start thinking about these as a serious material that we can use in the classroom.
And Jay, comment and say that there might be some generational issue now. I understand that someone who perhaps is more senior has been adopting a way of learning and teaching in a given way, and perhaps they're set in the ways in terms of instructing, which means a textbook, a normal textbook, a traditional textbook would be more close to the heart. But an argument for even for those people would be that says that, a textbook and an open textbook, the difference between something which you write and stays as is, with something which is digital and therefore ever evolving. So imagine having, as we said earlier, a textbook you can write almost like a normal textbook, but now it lives in digital world. It can be updated on all of its aspects, from its references to its figures to its examples in dynamic real time, and therefore bring infinite more contributions to what you've done once as you keep updating. So I think the dominant argument for you would be an open text will be a gateway for you to make it a digital textbook, which means it's a live document that it can be updated.
And it can be, yeah, that's a good point. It can be updated as new things happen.
In terms of the stigma, you can go, your faculty colleagues can go and read the reviews and see, what the reactions
But
were
then,
from.
I have seen the arguments that I don't have time. And the next comes, I don't have time to go through all of this. So how do you manage stigma in time?
As you said, I think, as my colleague here said, essentially, imagine the library providing some of the services that essentially is non-content specific. And it takes, okay, if you have a textbook, a chapter, a piece of document, we will help, or this is the guideline for you to convert this, if you like, to an open textbook. That is a mental and an energy threshold that perhaps many of us will never do because we're so busy. But if you offer the services, I think you know how to do it. And that could be a great resource for someone who doesn't think of an open textbook. And essentially say, yeah, you have the logistics, then we'll do it.
Now, you're saying they don't have time to work on one or to find them? Or is it both?
They are busy so with their classes, their research, they have to write a grant, getting funding for their projects. So there are a lot of things there.
I do have some questions online if we could take one of those and then come back. So the first question is, does the library offer a stipend to the library faculty fellows? So that's focusing on our fellows program.
I guess I should answer that. We have given a very small stipend. You have to realize these are not your typical faculty fellows like the provost office fellows that take a whole year or a number buyout of their time. So the way that this was set up is we put out a general topic that we wanted some help and focus from the faculty. So in this case, these three proposed and competed for having to work on our agenda of trying to help look further into the adoption and use of the open textbooks and open resources. And interestingly, so your three, we had 2, 4, 5, 6. We've had 6 total now. I think it's the first group, this is the second cohort. And so what happened? They made the proposal. I contacted those that were really good and had a conversation. Just it wasn't. This is an assignment. We weren't hiring them. It's what are you interested in committing to doing? And so we narrowed down. I think some had some pretty amazing, ambitious things. I said, you think you can do this? And also, how much time can you commit to this? And most sort of balanced around 10 hours a week for the 10 weeks of a term or so, some less. And again, they weren't filling out timesheets to clock them, but just to get a general sense of how much they could commit. And based on that, we offered to give a small stipend, and it truly is a small stipend compared to the total amount was really put in. And interestingly, every single one of them were surprised that they were saying, oh, I wasn't expecting any money. I just want to do this. So I think that's really to the credit of our faculty's commitment and interest and willingness to involve. But we wanted to be viewed as something that we really recognize, and that's one way to do it. That funding was, it's a one-time, I don't want to say gift, but it was a acknowledgement from Provost Blake in regards to some of the things, and I think we actually probably have completed our obtaining them because it was over 2 years. I'm looking at Angus, who remembers the details, but we haven't spent it all, and it's one bit of money that isn't swooped up at the end. So we are starting to think of other topics and areas for faculty fellows. Again, this it's like a mini fellow. Not that they're small, but the effort and the contributions, it's not the full-fledged one, but I am blown away by the kind of support and deliverables that you and the others have given and commitment to it. And also the ones in the past have continued just without impediment to work or to support us in different ways. So you had one other question?
There's 2 more, but should we go back and forth?
Is it?
I think that the issue of faculty time is really important. I think there's a demand on a lot of people. I'm the department chair, and I know that I'm benefiting from the fact that our professional field has not only a journal on pedagogy in our field, but also has an annual meeting devoted to teaching. So all those faculty, they're getting scholarship credit for scholarship on teaching. So I don't know what we can do with that, and I know that some fields do that better than others, or there should be, we can always put demands on our university and our colleges to recognize scholarship on teaching, but I also think we could maybe pressure our professional organizations as well.
You would identify yourself?
I was like, Christine Mulhorn, I'm Chair of Health Administration.
I think that's, and there are more than the college that has that. Do you see any value in trying to do some sort of a conference on campus across discipline? I mean,
especially if faculty, well, I mean, yeah, it's that question about those colleges and can faculty get credit for that towards their promotion?
Some incentives.
Right, so like I said, my job is easier in that way because it's already built into my profession. And we have a lot of our faculty are coming from the management field, so they are not coming from a research center or a grant-built area. So for them, I have plenty of projects because for us to maintain accreditation, we have to do a lot of this assessment and other things that are considered to be scholarship on teaching. So there's a lot of work to be done, and then developing good courses with good materials is another avenue.
If I may answer this, I want to be in your shoes now. In my college, for instance, one of the things that when we propose some ideas like this, the administrator will think of this as implementation and tactics, and rightfully so, right? Because you have to allocate man hours and you have to allocate space. And imagine you have the idea to essentially have this project-based learning course where you split people in teams and you want to adopt, learning by doing essentially. And then you say, well, you need a space of X number of square feet, and we don't have the space. So you see that, I understand there is a reason why administrators think in a different way, because you really want to deliver the content on a given fall term, for instance. But we also should not perhaps kill some of these innovative ideas that could be instilled one way or another. So I feel that sometimes the logic of administration tactics and very rigid rules win because of the logistics to get there. And some intermediate space would be the appropriate way to do this.
So one other thing I can just raise, and I'm open if there's how the library can help facilitate or bring the topic up. This whole initiative was raised with the executive council, and there was interest from the president. Wow, we should be in this, and others are doing, because this isn't anything we're uniquely doing. Got what, 600 members in this one network. It's been around a bit, and it's a movement. It's important. The other is even in inviting people to come here. I sent a second invitation to all the deans to see, this is their faculty and working, and 2 had responded with regrets that they couldn't come, but were really interested in acknowledging this is important. So I think somewhere in the Senate or the faculty too have to have some ways to help your departments see that this is a need, and I think it is about incentives, recognition, time. It's the management teachers. We also have a new Center for Teaching Excellence. I don't know. We've met Joanna and we're starting to talk with her, but I don't know, maybe something in that organization can help look at it as well.
That's a good point. I think there are opportunities for faculty leadership in this area.
Right. This is not just a library initiative. It's not, so we're just trying to help it along, and where we can help you identify and locate it. You had one more question from
There is
the
another
Zoom
one.
space?
Yep. It's from Fran Cornelius. Do you find yourself editing your book while you were teaching a course, or do you take notes and make changes later? I'm wondering if it's possible to make changes that won't affect the current class.
So did you get the first part of the question?
Do you find yourself editing your book while you're teaching, or do you wait until the course is over, the end of the semester, and then make changes if you find that something's not quite working? Do you do that in the middle of the term? I hope I got that right, Fran.
It's supposed to be. No, I'm gonna say, in the sense that like I see what happens with it, and that's what I've been doing is like taking notes for next time, in the sense that will this fall on its face, essentially? Is this gonna be complete? And if it is, it's something I'm gonna take down after the fact. They don't need to know that will never be done again in my classroom. So I don't necessarily want to, I don't make changes as I'm going, because I just want to see what works, what happens with it. But certainly the reaction I get from students is a very good indicator of this is working or this is not working.
Yes,
Just an example, again, going back to my colleague, Dr. Viva Goldman, developed this virtual microscope, this electronic. And then another colleague, Dr. Judy Churchill, has modified, it was initially developed for our MD program, but Judy Churchill has gone and modified it for some post-bac master's students. And then that some of the changes the editing could be happening, right in the middle of the semester, looking ahead and making changes based on what happened last year, based on what would be most helpful for these master's students who are preparing for medical school.
And in my case, it was completely dynamic. It was a blog-based type effort, like a wiki. Essentially, I had prepared material before class. You went in class, you didn't cover all the material, you covered more material, or you said things in class that you didn't have in your notes. So go back and change it. The students go back and do their research and come with questions. So we'll keep updating the material based on feedback to accommodate what perhaps I saw is the over-encompassing field that I want to cover with this particular lecture topic. So it was completely dynamic, back to the point of making it digital, and therefore it was completely easy for me to go and change it as many times as I wanted.
So we have a lot of flexibility there, which is great. And the traditional textbooks are, I know there's been stories that you've written letters about, and that these same errors are perpetuated over many editions. So I would throw this back and the drawbacks and
there's a new
quality
edition every
issues
year.
on the new edition comes out, but they don't always listen to us about what needs to be fixed. So
exactly.
So we're almost out of time, but before we thank you again, are there any last words of wisdom from our fellows with their experience?
Talk to your librarian.
I would like that we're an injection point, I think, in education. I think, the rising tuition costs and I think the falling enrollment across the nation or internationally, I think it forces us to think about the schools again with much more practical eye than just an adoption eye. And I feel, that would be perhaps the seed of thought for all of us to see how we can evolve in the 21st century education institution that perhaps thinks of promoting learning and teaching in an innovative way that fits us.
I had to come up with something profound.
No. You could just.
Practical.
I mean, I'm in English, so I guess the main thing I would suggest is, just have empathy for your students. I'm sure everybody has that already. But in the sense of see the world from their perspective. What do they need? What do they want? And what are their problems? And I always try to make their concerns my concerns. That would be my recommendation.
Excellent.
Well, I thank all of you who are here attending. All of we probably have more on Zoom or equal amounts here. We're really impressed by the breadth of audience that you guys attracted, and especially let us thank the three of you for really an invigorating and wonderful discussion.